On this episode of the Houndsman XP podcast, we are serving up a big old plate of crow. A couple weeks ago, Shorty and I released a podcast, part 2, caring for hounds on a budget. And we got a little pushback on that. And we got it from somebody that's pretty qualified to be giving us some pushback. I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Taylor Young, also known as the Tree Dog Doc. He's been making more appearances on podcasts lately than Joe Rogan. And he and I got together about doing this podcast, and I wanted the straight dope on some of what we were passing out there. And Shorty and I both agree we would rather give you correct information than be right. So what I mean by that is Houndsman XP is not about our ego and what we know. It's about getting you the right information. So when Dr. Young reached out to me and agreed to sit down and do this podcast, I went with my hat in my hand. I'm not going to lie. I was expecting to get my whipping. And we actually agreed on some things. He reiterated some things that we said, and he also clarified a few things. And I think you're really going to enjoy this podcast especially if you go back and overlay it on what Shorty and I talked about in part 2, talking about antibiotics. The Tree Dog Doc grew up hunting. He has tree dogs right now. That's why he's got the name Tree Dog Doc. So he's not unfamiliar with the listeners, the crowd, the crew that listens to this podcast, and he's able to talk about some of these antibiotics in a way that we can all understand it. You're really going to enjoy that part. Before we get to the podcast, I've got to tell you what's going on at Houndsman XP. We are going to hit 1 million downloads in just a little over 3 years at Houndsman XP. You, the listeners, have helped us achieve this, and we've got some big stuff coming for you. We're going to pay it back. You need to be paying attention to our social media platforms on Instagram and on Facebook, and GoWild. We're going to be talking about this stuff on GoWild as well. Great social media platform for hunters. But anyway, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a contest about who guesses the date properly for the 1 million download day. I can tell you that we're in the 960,000 range right now, so I'm not going to spoon feed this to you. But one day in this month, we are going to hit 1 million downloads. So there's a couple things. We're going to create a post on Facebook and on Instagram where you can drop your expected date. And then we're going to take all the people that were correct on that date. We're going to throw all those names in a hat for a big drawing. We're going to do personalized painting of you, your hounds, hunting memories, whatever it is. Whatever photo you want memorialized in a painting, we've contracted an artist to do this painting for you. What a great keepsake that's going to be. There's going to be other prize packages, things that go along with that, including a custom handmade knife. It's going to be cool. The other thing we're going to do is, for the month, is a contest for people who leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It's going to be easy. You go to Apple Podcasts, you click on our logo wherever you're listening to this in that app, write a review. We prefer you leave us a 5-star review, and then you have to write a line or two. Okay, write a line or two. Love the show, listen to every podcast, whatever you want to put in there, and then screenshot it, and you can either email it to me at chris.houndsmanxp@gmail.com. chris.houndsmanxp@gmail.com, or I'd prefer you to email it to Lauren, and that's lauren.houndsmanxp@gmail.com. Or you can post a picture of your screenshot under the post. We'll pin the post to the top of the group or to the top of our Houndsman XP page. You can enter it right there. We want to have some fun this month. It's a big month. We're doing special promotions with Dogs Are Treed. We're going to just do some off-the-wall drawings whenever we feel like it. It's going to be wild and crazy. We are stoked about hitting 1 million downloads. That is a mile marker for any podcaster. And we're going to pay it back to you because you made it happen. The Old South Dog Box is rocking, and it's time to get the tailgate down and dump the box. All right, this is take two on this one.
Technology,
yeah. I'm supposed to be the podcaster here. I don't even know how to run this podcast recorder, but I am in Virginia in Marion Heights, and I'm sitting down with Dr. Taylor Young, and I'll just give you the backdrop on what's going on here. You go by the Tree Dog Doc on social media.
Yep.
So everybody can find that and start following Dr. Young. And but the reason that we're here is because a few weeks ago you were on another podcast, the one that Ben Sheets produces, called Tree Talking Time. And I listened to you and I thought, well, Shorty referred to it in our podcast. And then I found it and I started listening to it. And the thing was, we were dropping the podcast on Caring for Hounds on a Budget at the same time, about the same time that you came out. And you found some discrepancies that Shorty made.
Maybe a few things I'd do different. Yeah, sure.
So that's why we're here. And I'll tell you what, I said this before, but we want to get the best information out there for our listeners, the most accurate information out there. And so you're here to set me straight and set us straight on some of the things we said and some of the things we did or talked about on the podcast. And I'm not afraid of that, so I'm here to take my whipping.
Well, like I say, to your great credit, when I brought that up, it'd be easy for somebody to get defensive and dismissive of it, but you didn't. You said, "Well, let's correct it and let's talk about it," and I greatly appreciated that. And so there's a lot of info that I agreed with, and then some of it that my training has taught me different. And so we can cover some of that stuff and talk about kind of some broad principles and reasons why and why not we do some things that we do as vets versus you guys out in the field.
Well, what do you go by Tree Dog Doc on social media?
I that's my sport. That's hunting is my hobby that I've done since as early as I can remember. And I got into tree dogs in middle school and then into high school. I was pretty heavy into it. Took a little break going to school, and then have gotten back into it with my latest pup. And so there's a couple of guys that focus on bird dogs, a couple guys that focus on gun dogs. And I was like, well, there's no vets that really are helping the tree dog community understand veterinary medicine and why we do those things.
Yeah, we've had Jonathan Bradshaw on. Yeah. He's huge in the retriever world.
Sure.
But it's good to have a vet that knows what we're out here doing and understands the things we're putting our dogs through. And a lot of times when I walk into a vet's office with my hunting dogs, I pass, or a lot of times I leave them in the truck.
Yeah.
I just leave them in the truck and go in and check in. And then when they call my name, I'll just go out and get them. But I'm sitting there with people who have got sweaters on their dogs and all kinds of stuff. And there's a huge disconnect in today's day and age on the utilitarian use of a dog and the fur baby culture. And it's nice to have a vet that understands both worlds.
Sure. Yeah. And I see those fur babies, quote unquote, and treat them. And there's lots of good people that love their dogs. But yes, it's a different mindset for sure. From a dog that's used in hunting and a dog that is, it's looked at as another child. Mm-hmm. And if you go and listen to that Tree Talking Time, we talked about some of that and the mindset of why I think differently. But of course, being raised around animals and hunting dogs is a big reason why I do.
Yeah. So how did you get to the point that you wanted to be a vet?
I think like pretty much most kids, I wanted to be one as a little kid because I thought you just play with puppies and kittens all day.
Yeah.
And as I got older and started to understand what it really looked like, still it was interested and it always kind of captured my imagination. But I got distracted by other possibilities in high school, and I went to undergrad to do a completely different thing. But growing up on the farm and having the vet come out and teach us how to castrate pigs and watching them check mares for pregnancy and those kind of things just always stuck with me.
So you grew up on a farm?
I did.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we grew up in the city till about middle school, and then moved out to where my dad grew up in Franklin County, Virginia, about middle school. And so from then on, we had all kinds of stuff out there: horses, pigs, cattle, chickens, what you name it, we had it. And so that's where I kind of got exposed to the farm animal side of things.
Yeah.
And but I always have had dogs since I was a kid, and I've always been around those too. So.
Do you ever keep any Pin-G in the refrigerator to shoot in a pig?
I don't think I ever had to treat a pig with an antibiotic.
Really?
Yeah, we focused on, my dad was kind of into I guess you could call it the alternative agriculture movement and trying to focus on, natural stuff, pasture rotation, minimizing the use of drugs, no antibiotics, things like that. And now that I've gone to vet school, I do think differently than I did growing up. But back then, no, we didn't use much antibiotic. And we really usually did not have a cause for it. And I can think of times growing up where I probably should have used one. But no, we didn't. We didn't really rely on that much. And that's different from a lot of people that grew up on a farm for sure.
That's interesting because it kind of brought something to mind. Is there just as much, you said you changed the way you thought about antibiotics. Is it because you got educated in antibiotics and you saw that maybe some of the hype around organic farming maybe wasn't all that, all it was hyped up to be, and antibiotics aren't from the devil type stuff?
That's exactly right. Antibiotics are a gift from God. They are amazing. I mean, you can just go look at the history of antibiotics. And when they created penicillin, what was it, World War I? I mean, it changed how they treated infections, and it was just mind-blowing, this ability we had. And they're a precious resource that we have, because the bad news is they're not making too many more of them. But yes, I changed how I looked at them. There is a line where the organic farmer has to think, is this animal suffering, and could an antibiotic prevent that suffering? And at that point, I think it is wrong to withhold antibiotics. And actually, in most organic, I guess, certification programs or whatever you call them, they outline that you cannot withhold antibiotics just for the sake of saying that you didn't have one. But there are still people who are not certified organic,
right,
that have that mindset of, an antibiotic will never touch my animal. And I do think from an animal welfare standpoint, that is wrong. But I do also think that we have something to learn from them, which is minimizing as much as possible the use of those antibiotics to save them for women who really need them. And we can talk about resistance and things like that and why it's important to preserve the ones that we've got. But yes, it did change how I looked at things after I learned how and why and when they're supposed to be used.
Well, I think that last podcast we did was mainly on antibiotics, and we also talked about Dex a little bit, and I want to get into all that. But tell me about your dog. What kind of dog you hunting?
Yeah, on take one of this, he called him a mountain cur, and I was a little offended. But this is I've got a Ladner blackmouth cur, and there's a couple different strains of the blackmouths, but he's straight from the Ladners down in Mississippi, and they still breed a pretty versatile all around dog. They do have specific lines in their Ladners that are geared one more towards the other, but I've got him out of their best tree dogs, and he's about a year and a half, and his name's Rip, and we're trying to focus on squirrels right now. And that's the first Ladner that I had in high school. That's what we did, squirrel and coon hunted. And so that's what I'm doing with him, getting him started on some squirrels. We'll switch him over to coons about midwinter. And so that's anytime I've got free time, which is precious right now. We're usually in the woods trying to get him on some squirrels right now. So
yeah, good deal. Those LH Ladner used to advertise all those cur dogs. I used to look at them in full cry. And my uncle that got me into hunting with hounds and dogs, chasing raccoons and stuff around Indiana there. He had a blackmouth cur that was always a pretty sharp little dog. You could tell she was a little bit different than the hounds, a little more alert, a little more aware of what, she would catch things around her a little bit more. A hound would be tied up to the box next to her taking a nap, and she'd be snoozing, and a squirrel you could hear a squirrel cutting on a nut or something, and she'd perk up and she'd look at it, and the hound would just be laying there. But a little bit different, and they're real versatile as far as the way they were bred in the South. I mean, catching hogs, gathering cattle. When you're cutting hogs and bringing them in, or you're ringing hogs, or whatever you were doing down there, that's what they were always bred for. And then to put meat in the pot, so they did everything.
Yeah. They got a little bit of a handle on them, kind of like the mountain curs.
Yeah.
I think they got a little bit more personality than some of the other cur breeds.
Yeah.
And Rip's always entertaining, if not frustrating. But
right.
He's a knucklehead. But he's a lot of fun to be around and to have in the woods. When it's time to go home, because I got to go on a call or get back to the kids, it's time to go home, and he's there ready to roll.
Right.
And he's good hunting smaller patches of woods like we've got around here, but we can go out national forest and he'll get a little deeper. So he's a great dog.
How far out will he range on his own, or have you had him range at this point?
Yeah, he's probably averaging about 2 to 250 right now.
Mm-hmm.
And in unfamiliar woods, he'll hang out a little bit closer. But in my spots that we go hit more often, he'll get out there and go. But he's not going to go 500 yards and get hooked and stay there. That's not their style. They more hunt with you and for you, rather than just being focused on going and getting up under a tree. Right. And some guys don't like that, and that I understand. Mm-hmm. But for me, kind of hunting and seeing what he's doing and him checking in on me and going the way I want to go, it makes life easy. So I like it.
Yeah. And I drove up, I don't even know which way I came to get here, but came over from the Christiansburg area and drove up under the Bluegrass Park, or the Blue Ridge Parkway, and came up the river there. And I was amazed at all of the national forests and stuff you've got right over there. So you got plenty of hunting.
20 minutes from here, and we're in the national forest.
Yeah.
And man, it's pretty nice to be able to have that much public land.
No doubt.
That close.
No doubt. Well, let's dive into some of the antibiotic stuff, and is there anything specific that you wanted to talk about that we may have misled some people? Because I'll preface it this way. I do not like when I see incorrect information that somebody puts on social media, especially when it comes to how to take care of our animals. So a lot of these guys that have been in hounds for a long time, you take a guy like Shorty that has been in ranching. He's hunting backcountry, a long way from a veterinarian. You got to have a little bit of smarts about you to be able to solve some pretty simple stuff. But I know Shorty, he's a good friend of mine, and I know that if he's got a serious problem, he's packing up and heading to town.
Right.
But it's a different culture type thing, and they're probably not going to run to the vet for a snake bite. They've treated snake bites. They've done it for a long time. It'd be like, what's traumatic for somebody that grew up in an urban setting? If they see a calf that's tangled up in barbed wire with some blood scratches, some scratches on it, and they're bleeding, it's going to freak them out, and they're going to think they need to call the vet. Where a farmer's going to walk out there and he's going to untangle him, look at it. If he needs a shot of Pen G, he's going to give him a shot of Pen G and smack him on the butt and put him back out in the pasture, or do something similar. You know what I mean?
Sure. Because
of the experience. So where do we draw the line between, farm medicine and veterinarian medicine for us? Hound doggers and vets.
I guess I'll kind of start with the 1,000-foot overview of how medical, both us vets and human med is starting to look at antibiotics, and because it is rapidly changing because of big issues like antimicrobial resistance, which I'll get to. But it used to be that the antibiotics, like I said, they're amazing. They have literally, you can't quantify how many lives they've saved since they were, penicillin was invented. And so they're amazing when they're used right. The problem is that we've used them so much that we are now creating these bacteria that no longer respond, and not just in animals, but in people. And the problem is that we share a lot of these same bacteria, so we're creating resistant bugs in animals by treating them with antibiotics that are then spreading to people and creating infections that you can't kill anymore because those bugs don't respond. So it used to be that we would use antibiotics, and there's still a lot of practitioners that view antibiotics as a just-in-case kind of thing. Well, man, that cut does look pretty yucky. You know, it's pretty dirty. Let's go ahead and throw some antibiotics in there just in case it gets infected. Snake bites. Let's go ahead, just in case that snake bite gets infected, let's just go ahead and start some antibiotics. And in certain situations, that is appropriate, and there's guidelines for helping us decide that. But as a general rule, we're using that much, much, much less as a just-in-case situation, and we're not using them until we have to. And that's because we want to preserve their efficacy. The antibiotics that we have now are pretty much what we're going to have for the foreseeable future, because they're not coming out anymore. We're not making new antibiotics like we used to.
So let me break this down for my simple mind. What you're saying is I'm out hog hunting. I get a dog hit by a hog. He's got a cut on his shoulder. I take it back in. Maybe I clean it up and I staple it in the field, bring him back in, and I think, well, I'm just going to give him a shot of antibiotics because we're in the marsh. There's all kinds of nasty stuff out there. Hogs are going to every other, they're dirty. I shouldn't just be coming home and giving him a shot of Pen-G.
Okay, so let's go on that specific example. So now instead of saying we're just going to give a shot just to cover our bases, in that situation, if you brought that dog to me, he would absolutely be getting antibiotics. But before he got antibiotics, we would do a couple things first. The first thing is that we are relying on topical antibiotics as much as possible instead of systemic antibiotics. And that's because the topical antibiotics that we use are less important to human medicine than they are to us. And so if we can treat topically instead of treating systemically, that's always the first step. That we have this phrase called, we say, dilution is the solution to pollution. All right. And if we can dilute out the bacteria by flushing, by using topical antibiotics, antibiotic solutions, that's how we get rid of it versus relying on a shot. And that is going to get you much farther anyways, even by adding systemic antibiotics than not. So this dog comes in, he's cut. First thing he's going to get is sedated. He's going to get that wound explored. Man, you can get in real trouble. Just this weekend, I had a farm animal that died before I could get to it because the wound was left for 3 days before it got addressed, and the farmer thought it was fine, and it wasn't, and then he got septic and died.
Right.
So those wounds can really hide. Tusk can get pretty deep and in places you don't want it to go, and from the surface, it looks okay, but underneath, it's not okay. And so proper assessment of the wound is super important. So they get sedated, they get anesthetized, they get the area clipped, cleaned, and explored. And we do that really carefully to make sure that it's not penetrating into a abdominal or thoracic cavity, making sure that it's not harmed a vital piece. And then we're diluting it flush, using something like chlorhexidine. Novosan is the brand. You can go get it at Tractor Supply shelf, and we're diluting out. And then,
what's it called again?
Sure, chlorhexidine.
Yeah.
Yep. Or Novosan, I think I'm saying that right, is the name brand, but you can get a bunch of generics now. It's like a blue liquid.
Okay.
And it's a solution. You don't want the scrub for a wound. The solution doesn't have the detergent in there like a scrub does. But you follow the label instructions and you dilute it out. And
wear gloves.
And wear gloves. That stuff, it doesn't dye you as quite as bad as the iodine does. But flushing, you got to be careful about in the field, because if you flush into a wound that you don't know where it ends, you get a wound on the chest or the abdomen and you're putting flush in there, you're putting fluid where you don't want it. So you got to be careful. But so we're flushing with chlorhexidine. We're getting as much of that junk out of there as we can. And at that point, we decide whether or not it's going to get closed, meaning staples or stitches. Because sometimes we leave them open, so air is bad for bacteria. So, and then at that point, we're deciding on whether we need to add a systemic antibiotic. For a dog hunting in the swamp, gets cut up by a hog, I'm probably using a systemic antibiotic. Probably not picking penicillin, but yes, I'm probably going to use a systemic.
Right.
But for the dog that's out here, my dog, most common things I run into: barbed wire, gosh, how many people get barbed wire cuts during hunting season, right? And then just, general scrapes and cuts, comes back with a bloody tongue from panting and getting his tongue cut, ears shredded, something like that. As of yet, in the last year and a half that I've been out of vet school and running RIP, I have not prescribed him an antibiotic yet. Because most of the time you just don't need it. Their own body will be able to fight off infections if they're healthy and in good shape. And so there's a lot of those times when you might give it just in case it could turn infected and you really don't need to. But for those dirty wounds like you're describing, yeah, absolutely. So we have kind of a classification scheme of antibiotic, or I guess wound, and whether an antibiotic is indicated: clean, contaminated, and dirty. And a clean wound doesn't need antibiotics. A dirty wound does. Clean, contaminated, or contaminated may or may not, based on how the wound looks and how deep it is. So it's not just as simple as there's a wound, needs an antibiotic. There's a lot more that goes into it.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, you're out there in the field and, I know people that hunt in Mexico. They'll hunt in Sonora, Mexico, 50,000 acre ranch, whatever. How do they get away from what advice do you have for them when you may be, a lot of our houndsmen that listen to this podcast are in South Africa or in Southern Africa. I don't know what vet medicine's like over there.
Me either.
So you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. And I think that's where we were coming from on the podcast. But it's time to throw Shorty under the bus. So let's go through what we talked about and find out what we do. Be nice to me. So tell me what we did good first.
Okay, we can do that. It's like my kids, right? The information sandwich. So no, there's a lot of good info we had. Talking about bacteriostatic versus bactericidal, talking about the different drugs and some of their potential uses. What I will say is that, I'll get into it. So there's a lot of the good stuff there, and then I heard a couple of good things. Making sure he was very careful about talking about duration and talking about how often you need to give things, and all of those things are really important when we talk about giving antibiotics. So the fact that we're thinking about that is great. You guys talked about resistance, and talked about how if you keep giving these antibiotics, then you create a resistance to it, and it's with the bacteria themselves that we're creating a problem. So you're talking about a lot of the things that we're preaching. And so, and then, talking about ears and flushing and those kind of things. Well, we just talked about flushing out that hog cut. Flushing is huge when it's the right thing to do, and it gets you a lot further. So a lot of that stuff.
Did you like the Monistat 7 for the ears?
I was thinking about that this morning because I went back and listened to it again. And
you did?
I did. Yeah,
Thank you.
I sure did.
All right. We got another download.
Well, there you go. Racking up your count. So the Monistat, when we treat and prescribe ear stuff, almost everything you get from a veterinary supplier has an anti-inflammatory, an antibiotic, and an antifungal. And Monistat only has the antifungal component of that. And the reason that we mix the other two is almost inevitably if you culture an ear, by culture I mean you take a swab of an infected ear, you grow it out on a plate, and then you see what type of bacteria or fungus it's growing. Even if you think that ear only has yeast in it, it usually also has a bacteria that's grown out of there too. And then you add the anti-inflammatory topically, that reduces the pain and inflammation for the dog's sake and their welfare. So the Monistat is on the right track. It's just not as far as I would go, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But flushing, absolutely. That's the most important thing.
And I did have the formula wrong on the ear beer thing that I put out there. I said equal parts of an equal part of mineral oil. You only need a few drops of mineral oil after you use apple cider vinegar, the peroxide, and a rubbing alcohol. That was actually what we put on our ears. And apple cider vinegar, alcohol, and peroxide together. And you got the drying thing, you got the pH thing, and the mineral oil just helps it feel greasy and makes you wipe your ears off a lot. But
that mineral oil.
Yeah. But no, I just want to make that correction, and just as a preventative thing that we do as scuba, we dove in some nasty stuff.
Yep.
You come out of there and the first thing you did was dry off and put, as soon as you got your hood off and your mask off, man, we were treating our ears. If we didn't, we were a wreck.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's something that you can recommend for that too.
Well, with the biggest thing versus, the homemade cleaning is that the skin pH of people and the skin pH of dogs is different. Mm-hmm. And so stuff designed for people's skin is not adequate for dog skin. Mm-hmm. And so I usually discourage homemade recipes because there are so many commercially available, made specifically for dogs.
I haven't done that for years. I use the dog stuff in my ears now after I swim in the pond. I do. I use the Udic, the Odic, the different Odic solutions that you can get from vet supply houses. I'll get out of the pond after swimming in the pond, and I'll use it on myself.
Well, you'll have to talk to your physician about that one. But there are, there's so many good things you can get now. I like stuff made by this company called Detra, Dechra. They make a bunch of different ear flushes, and you can get some of them with, antibiotic and antifungal in it. Mm-hmm. Some of them are just a basic flushing. The key with flushing is use it a lot. Like, don't use a smaller for just a few drops. Fill that ear up and massage and let them shake their heads.
That's another good point. Most people, when they massage an ear, they just go to the top of the ear there and they rub their ears.
Yep.
You actually need to go all the way down towards the base of the jawbone, down deep in that ear, and massage it down there. And if you start massaging down there, you'll get the air out and it'll come up, and that solution will go all the way to where it needs to go.
Yeah, so people's ear canals are straight in, mm-hmm. right? Dogs are more like an L, and I write articles for Full Cry, and I put this in detail in the one that's about to come out here in September's issue. But dogs' ear canals are shaped like an L, and you got the vertical canal and horizontal canal, mm-hmm. so it's a lot deeper than ours.
Yeah.
And you're not going to reach it with a Q-tip to get all the way down in there close to the eardrum. So that's why flushing is so important. And just like you said, if you massage out at the entrance of that ear canal, you're not getting where the gunk is. The gunk is way down there deep. And so massaging, and I like to tell people, set a stopwatch and massage for a full minute with that ear full of flush, and that you'll just see the gunk start to float up to the top of that flush. It's gross, but awesome.
Yeah.
And so by sitting there and massaging that, if you don't get the gunk out, the antifungal and the antibiotic can't get to the skin, or they need to go to kill the infection. Mm-hmm. So flushing, either while you're treating an ear infection or trying to prevent one, is really, really the key.
Let's talk about prevention. I think that's always the best thing is so when would you recommend somebody flush an ear? Is there any particular time where you put them on a routine, or is it like, okay, stay on this routine, but we just hunted a nasty swamp, I need to go ahead and flush? What's your recommendation on that?
The recommendation is it depends, but this time of the year is we treat ear infections usually multiple a day at the clinic. Mm-hmm. It's moistness, and then conformation is a big contributor. So the hounds are the classics to get the ear infection because they have this huge heavy ear flap, or the pinna is the technical name for it, that's weighing down that ear over the canal, and the ear canal is not getting airflow like another dog would. Mm-hmm. And so for dogs that are in this high, humid, sticky heat like we are here in Virginia, especially further south, if you're hunting in damp or wet conditions like hunting swamps, if your dogs ran through the creek or the river, just go ahead and flush. Keep some in your truck. Flush their ears out. You don't need to necessarily get down in there with cotton swabs and all that stuff. Just flush. And then as a matter of routine maintenance throughout the rest of the year, it depends on the dog. If you have a dog that is prone to ear infections, mm-hmm. flush more often than the dog that, like my Ladner cur, his ears are kind of higher set. They're not heavy flap hanging down. He's not really much at risk for it, so I don't routinely flush his ears. But the dogs that are predisposed to it, absolutely, just go ahead and flush.
Is it once a month too much?
No, and if you're using the right cleaner that is not affecting the pH negatively, you can flush on a weekly basis, or even more often if you need to, mm-hmm. If you're using the right stuff.
I know, I've done it so many times. You'll have a young dog that's coming on hard. He's treeing good and everything, and all of a sudden he starts leaving trees. As soon as he gets there, he'll locate. He'll give you a few tree barks, and then he's walking off, and you're thinking, what in the world is going on? I probably got rid of a lot of good young dogs like that before I realized that I wasn't treating ears. Those ears, when they rock that head back and they start treeing and their ears are already in pain, a lot of times, that's just a little tip. A lot of times, if you take care of a dog's ears and you can improve his tree style, and especially in these young dogs, you're not creating a negative experience for them when they're just learning their craft.
Yeah.
You know, it's just something I picked up on. So I'm a big ear guy.
Yeah.
I'm always, looking for ways to take care of dogs' ears.
And hounds are so tough. When we get hounds in the clinic, the word we use is stoic. I mean, they can be, guts hanging out, and they're just sitting there looking at you, wagging their tail. That's very different than a lot of breeds.
Yeah.
And so, you might not see obvious signs of an ear infection like a lab would show you, where their head shaking, scratching, digging at an ear, stuff like that. You might, and you often do, but like you said, sometimes it's really subtle to nothing.
Oh, man. If I see an ear shake, if I see a head shake, I'm out there feeding or whatever, and a dog comes out and it shakes its head, I've got my eyes on it.
Yep.
I'm watching, and
Yep.
I'm looking, and I'm checking, and I'm flushing.
Absolutely. Just go ahead and flush it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And two, you mentioned the head rocking back. People are more prone to getting otitis media, like a middle ear infection or inner ear infection. Dogs are a little different in that they usually get an externa, otitis externa, which is just that external ear canal. But what is the same is that if you've ever had an ear infection, which sounds like you had in all your diving, it hurts like heck.
Yeah.
My kids have had repeated ear infections this last year, and they're crying, they're hurting.
You need to get some of that Otic from the vet supply. I did to all my kids, man.
I tell you what, talking about antibiotic resistance and stuff like that, man, my kids got put on multiple rounds of amoxicillin and these other cephalosporins, and I finally was like, Doc, when do we go in and drain that fluid? Because that's what we're taught to do.
Yeah.
And finally, my daughter went and got ear tubes. And so, putting a little hole in that eardrum because, again, dilution is a solution to pollution.
Right.
And we got to get that fluid out of there. These antibiotics are not penetrating. But, yeah, so human med and their antibiotic usage is something to talk about and overuse of it. But
I bet your doctor thought the same thing about you. She thought about me. It's like, what's this guy know? He's a veterinarian.
Right.
Boom. But I bet, no, seriously, Taylor, I bet that, let's talk about that importance. I want to dive a little deeper into this resistance that these bacteria are getting and why we should be cautious about over-medicating with the antibiotics. Because in my generation, you got antibiotics for everything. I mean, my wife has built up such a resistance to antibiotics. They over medicated her where it actually affected the pigment in her teeth.
Whoa.
Because she had a sniffle, her mom would run her to the doctor. My mother-in-law doesn't listen to this, so I'm safe. But she'll tell you. And she has developed a lot of resistance. So now, later on in life, there's certain antibiotics that don't work with her anymore because she developed that is it the bacteria or what is it? Is it the body rejecting it or is it the bacteria?
Yeah, it's the bacteria themselves.
So the bacteria is evolving. And a lot of people will think they have different feelings about evolution. I've got problems with Darwin. I don't have problems with evolution. Things evolve in this world.
So there's that, or there's, you've probably heard of MRSA. Most people are probably, MRSA stands for methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. And so that is a antibiotic that's, infamous because...
A bacteria?
Yep, it is a bacteria. Yep, and it's resistant to methicillin. What the heck's methicillin? Methicillin is an antibiotic in the class of penicillin, which is called the beta-lactams. All right, and so penicillin, cephalosporins, a couple other bigger gun antibiotics, they're in the beta-lactam class, and they have this chemical ring, and what it does is it inserts itself into the cell wall of bacteria, and then it prevents that bacteria from being able to replicate and reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's how penicillin works. It's amazing. Well, what's happened is these bacteria have then developed this thing called beta-lactamase. It's an enzyme that breaks down the beta-lactam ring. And so the bacteria has literally developed its own defense mechanism against that antibiotic, so the antibiotic cannot kill it. So then we countered and we said, well, let's do this thing. So you've maybe heard of Clavamox, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's amoxicillin clavulanic acid. Clavulanic acid is a potentiator, I guess. It fights the beta-lactamase so that the amoxicillin can then kill the bacteria. But now we have bacteria that are developing resistance to even that.
So they got their own wars going on.
Exactly right. Exactly
Wow.
right. And then you add in these bacteria like Salmonella, E. coli's, and these are, we can think of them as kind of a gram-negative versus gram-positive bacterias, but E. coli and Salmonella, they can actually develop resistance that they then pass on to other species of bacteria. They develop a gene that fights off whatever antibiotic that used to work just by being exposed to it. Then they can, plasmids is one of the things that does it. They can give that to another species of bacteria, and now that bacteria no longer responds to the antibiotic. That's scary.
Yeah.
That's scary. Not many things that keep me up at night, but thinking about antibiotic resistance is one sometimes.
Yeah.
And because it can happen so fast, and you can start treating, either a person or an animal with an antibiotic, and the instant that you start using it, there are bacteria in your body developing resistance that very first day to that antibiotic. Not necessarily the ones that are causing the disease, but there are other bacteria in your gut and your body getting exposed to it that are developing a resistance to it. And even if they aren't the bad ones, they can give that resistance gene to the bad ones.
Mm-hmm.
So it's complicated, but now you might see why we try to be so careful about using them, because every time you use an antibiotic, you are developing resistance, even if on a low level, to you and to the bacteria in your body that are naturally there.
Yeah.
So
when we were talking about tick-borne diseases, we're talking about doxycycline. I think I brought up the fact that I couldn't even believe this guy told me this. He's like, oh yeah, I just run them through thing is doxy every year, and I'm thinking, well, are they going to get bit? What if they get bit by an infected tick right after you're done with the doxy? They're going to have to wait for a year to get this again, or now you've got a legitimate issue, and so next week you're going to put them on another round of doxy.
right.
What happens when we do that?
The one good thing there is that, to my knowledge, we are not struggling with antibiotic resistance in a lot of our tick-borne diseases yet.
Yeah.
But I just can't imagine that it's not, and that we're not headed that direction.
Everyone else, every other bacteria is, right?
Right. Especially, the staph, the streps, those E. coli's, things like that I talked about. So using them because you think that you have, a tick-borne disease issue is really, frankly, an irresponsible use of antibiotics, just for the reasons we talked about.
Yeah.
And if there's two things that I think are overdiagnosed amongst the hound community, it is thyroid disease and tick-borne illness. And not to say we don't see a lot of either. I think we definitely see more tick-borne illness than thyroid disease. But just because your dog comes in to the clinic and they've got a fever and they pop positive on a SNAP test, and I'll explain what that is in a second, but just because they have those two things does not mean they are currently affected by tick-borne illness.
Mm-hmm.
And so by just assuming that's the problem, treating with doxy and they get better, we're kind of self-affirming our belief that was the issue, when really it could have been a multitude of other things. And so we have to be careful about just jumping to tick-borne.
What was that study you talked about?
So we were talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? So the Dunning-Kruger effect is named after this study that was done in the 90s, and these two psychologists set people down and they gave them a test, and they had to answer like logic questions and general knowledge questions, and then after they were done with the test, they then had to rate themselves on how well they thought they did.
How do you think he did?
The people that consistently scored lowest on the actual test consistently rated themselves very high on how they actually did. And so there's this danger zone where if you do something a few times, you get a little bit of knowledge, you tend to overestimate how much you actually know. about that subject area, and that goes for many, many areas.
Sure.
But it is huge amongst people self-treating their animals.
How do you treat it? Maybe that's what we ought to be talking about on the Houndsman XP podcast.
How do you treat the Dunning-Kruger effect? The first thing is to be aware that it's a thing, right? Yeah. I mean, seriously, when I learned about it in vet school, I went, oh, man, I do that all the time.
I'm like sitting here self-reflecting right now.
Sure. Right. What do I actually know? But it's true. We tend to overinflate our own what we actually know, and the more that you learn about vet med, sitting there in school, I learned that first year. By second and third year, I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to learn all this? I know nothing, because there's this kind of curve type effect where you learn a little bit and you think you know it all, and then the more you learn, you start coming down that curve. I know nothing, and then you kind of even back out where you know a lot, but you also are aware of what you don't know. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people that are on that first high part of that curve where they say, man, I know everything because I know a little bit of something. Mm-hmm. And that's a dangerous place to be. Yeah,
so you get a guy that thinks he's got a tick-borne illness or bacteria, treats with a round of fish docks, and all of a sudden his dog's performing again, and he thinks, oh, I fixed it.
Boom, you got it. And
now when somebody asks what's going on with tick, just on Facebook, it's like, I've got experience.
That's it. I cannot tell you how many times somebody will come into the clinic, and not just hound dogs, but, oh, my dog has this problem. Oh, well, why do you think it has this problem? Well, because it's doing exactly what my last dog did that had this problem. Okay, well, there's 1,000 causes for a dog that's vomiting, so not every dog that's vomiting has a foreign body stuck in its gut, but every owner thinks that their dogs for the rest of their life has a foreign body stuck because their first dog did. Yeah. But I've been trained to know all of the possible causes and how to go through the diagnostic tree to figure out, is that actually the cause or is it something else? Right. And so, yes, sometimes you're right. Sometimes it is a foreign body. Sometimes it is tick-borne illness. And, a lot of times
what's the craziest thing you've ever taken out of a dog?
I haven't got to cut a whole lot of foreign bodies yet. My boss tends to get a lot of those because I'm running out to go see a cow or a horse or something. And those are longer involved surgeries. I've cut. This
is a rabbit hole. This is definitely a rabbit path right here.
The craziest stories I've heard. I mean, I've cut some foam balls out. I've seen pistachios taken out of a cat gut that was stuck somewhere down the intestine. I mean, the classics are like taking panties out that don't belong to the wife in the family. Yeah, that happens all the time. And then the more you think about it, the funnier it gets, right?
I know. I don't even think I've got a story, but I can't top that one.
I haven't had to personally experience that awkwardness yet, but I think it's coming. Dogs will eat all kinds of crazy stuff. Corn cobs was the latest recent one. A dog ate 3 corn cobs that my boss had to take out of the stomach because they wouldn't pass through. Yeah. And the dog just scarfed them up like that out of the trash can. But, dogs will eat all kinds of stuff.
When I was running Canine, one of the things that we were rewarded with was we would take a hand towel and then roll it up and then tape it. We'd put 3 sets of tape on it. We'd make our own. We could wash them and all that stuff. The reason is because when your dog gives you the indication they want to play tug of war, you can throw it and they can retrieve it, play tug of war with it. It was perfect. They were cheap. My dog decides she did her job. I threw the towel in and gave her a reward, and she picked it up, upended it, and swallowed that dude. Oof. I mean, boom, before I could even get my hand in her mouth to grab the end of it, gone. And I'm like, I've got to take this dog to the vet because if she dies, I might get fired. No, that's wrong. I took her because I was concerned about her. Sure, but, I knew she wasn't going to pass that dude.
Yep.
And took her to the vet, and my vet made a lasso on a probe and took it and had an endoscope in there, and he went in there and he lassoed that dude, looped it, and pulled it straight out. It was amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was crazy. I was like,
endoscopes there's so many non-invasive tools we have now to use versus just cutting into a dog.
Yeah.
That's a cool way to be able to do it.
Yeah. I got there quick enough because the dog's gut worked so fast it didn't make it back into the intestine yet. So.
Exactly. There you go. Again.
But that does not top the panties that belong to the girlfriend, not your wife story.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yep. There's. I know my time is coming. I think it's almost a rite of passage amongst vets because it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we covered that on the resistance. I think what's your recommendation for, obviously, being a veterinarian? Antibiotics should be administered by you, right?
I think it would depend on the client and the situation. Somebody like Shorty, who's truly that far from being able to get to a vet, might be different than my local coon hunters who are easily accessible to me. And I'd prefer to keep it as close to the vest as I can, just to help protect that usage of it. The antibiotics I usually prescribe are very cheap, so it's not a matter of getting the money out of you. It's just a matter of safeguarding those antibiotics.
Okay, you brought up a good point there. What do you say about the guys that are like, they're just trying to get my money, veterinary medicine's a racket type thing?
I would say there are bad apples in every bunch, and there are absolutely vets like that, but they're few and far between. I have yet to meet a vet that I think got into it to try to get rich, because if you want to get rich, there's a lot of other ways to go about it. Human Med, they make over double what the average salary is in vet med.
How long was your vet school?
4 years of vet school, plus your undergrad before that.
Undergrad before that?
Yep.
So total, how long did you spend in college?
So 8 years is the average.
8 years.
Yep.
There's kids making YouTube videos at 16 that are millionaires. There's easier ways to get rich, right?
There are easier ways to get rich and much less stressful ways to get rich. Yeah, absolutely. And, I talked about on Ben's podcast about the cost of veterinary education and how that's influencing things. But, for us, we have no insurance hiding our pricing. Pet insurance is starting to get there, but, that cost of human med is astronomical because of the influence of insurance. And we also have no government subsidizing anything that we do. Nobody's helping out the local little clinic. It's all on what we can bring in. So your cost of coming in to treat your dog, you're supporting a local veterinarian who's usually a local part of your community, and you're supporting the staff members that they are hiring and employing. You're supporting a local business by and large. Now, we talked about corporate buyouts too on Ben's podcast and how many corporate clinics there are.
That's one thing that I've always tried to maintain not just knowing who to call.
Yeah.
But like Dr. Hubbard is my vet that understands hunting. He understands hunting dogs. He understands me. And we got a relationship. He's a hunter himself, and so he understands that. I used to have a veterinarian, Dr. Little in Terre Haute, who is a hunter, so he understood. And it's more than just. I mean, I would see him in public, and we would speak, and it's a relationship, because if you don't maintain a relationship, the day's going to come when you are going to need a veterinarian. You can't fix it. And it's better have some mutual trust there, that you can go in and you're going to have faith that you're going to do everything that you can to save that dog. And you understand that, and I'm going to understand that it's going to be expensive, but it's going to be cheaper than the alternative.
Sure.
Yep.
Absolutely. And there's, just like we talked about
That was very
earlier.
poorly worded on my part. I was kind of searching for that a little bit.
No, I got what you meant. If we can address the problem before it gets worse, and you acknowledge that sometimes it's going to be expensive. A lot of times people will walk in and they think, I just want to run tests just to pad your bill. And I don't. Like I said, there are vets that do that kind of stuff, but they're few and far between. If I ask you for a test to run it and it costs, $150, it's because I genuinely think that's going to get me good information to help me decide what's actually wrong with your dog.
Yeah.
If you walk into the human hospital and tie their hands and say, I want you to physically examine me, but I want you to run no tests and correctly diagnose me, they're going to laugh at you, because they depend on those diagnostic tests to figure out what's wrong with you. And we do too. And so we're not just doing it to spend your money. We're doing it to try to figure out what's wrong with your dog. And our code of ethics states that we're doing it, for the benefit of the patient and to alleviate animal suffering. That's in the animal oath, the veterinarian oath rather. And so, we're doing it for a good reason, and it's not just to get money out of you.
Yeah.
I'm on flat salary. I don't make extra money because you chose this test or that test.
You don't get commission.
I don't on small animal stuff. Yeah. And
you're not getting like you're not taking a cruise for selling a lot of Frontline Plus this year.
No.
Really?
Not so much. No.
Man, you should have sold insurance.
My parents sold houses growing up, and we did get to go on cruises. So I don't know what I'm doing, but no. You know, and there are clinics that, yes, they do operate based off commission and things like that. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but, you know, for our clinic setup, we're doing it to try to correctly get to the bottom of what's going on with your dog.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel like you can trust your vet, if you feel like they are a bill patter, look around, see if you can find one you trust. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
One thing I'll say, I want to get your feeling on this because I hear this a lot. I wish I still had an old school vet. I wish I still had that old farm vet around.
Yeah.
From what you've told me, we've come a long way from giving everything a shot of Pen-G and kicking it out the door.
Yeah.
Because the bacteria have evolved.
Yep. The old farm vet, right? The old Doc McGillicuddy, one of my professors used to talk about that type guy is. There's a wealth of knowledge to be learned from those guys. And I sought out clinics that had those kind of vets so that I could learn from them because experience in School of Hard Knocks teaches you a whole lot.
You bet.
At the same time, there's something to be said for not just getting stuck on one way of doing things and learning new methods, new treatments. And I have worked with young vets that are closer to my age who were so heavily influenced by their older teachers that they don't do the new things. And then I've seen the opposite where I've seen some older vets that are so up to date on the newest methods and research and medicines that I'm like, wow, dude, I mean, how do you read and spend so much time figuring that stuff out?
Yeah.
So, you know, the old school thing that I think that people are really looking for when they say that is they want common sense. They want somebody who is able to look at things from your perspective and not just the perspective of a vet. And they're really wanting somebody who they can trust and that will empathize with their situation. And I do think there's a loss of a lot of that type of vet out there.
I'll give you an example. I took a dog to a vet in another state. I was on a trip and had to do some of my own first aid on the dog to get it in there. And when I walked in, I was treated like I was actually treated like I sat out in the parking lot and beat that dog and abused it when I brought it in. It was like, oh my gosh, who did this? Oh my gosh, why would anybody do this? I did that.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? Because I had to get the dog here, you know, and that's not good in any walk of life. And that's frustrating for us because my sutures aren't perfect. No, I'm sorry. Yes, but there is a drain tube in it, you know, and it did take me 2 days to get down here. By the time I got off the mountain and, you know, got everything and got here, he needs to be checked out. But yeah, you're right. I'm glad you said that. Common sense. And I think some of the draw to the old school vets was, they're just pretty common, you know. Doc Beckett would show up at the farm and he might have just come from a hog farm and his truck smelled like a hog farm. And it was just one of those deals. It's like, how you doing, Doc? Pretty good, Chris. How you doing today? What we got here? You know, and just a normal guy. It wasn't like, oh, I'm here. I've been to vet school and you're just an idiot. Get out of my way.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think those are definitely lacking nowadays, and it's partly how, you know, students are selected for vet school and the type of people that we're trying to recruit. But on the flip side, you know, from our perspective, you know, the old school vets, sometimes they get stuck in their ways, and there are new things that come out, new research that gets, you know, exposes new medications. You know, like we can go to those steroids in a little bit, but prednisone, you know, there's people that call that the golden bullet. Prednisone's a steroid in the dexamethasone class, right? And because, you know, a steroid will fix, quote unquote, a lot of things and make a lot of things look better. But, you know, back when we didn't have all of the knowledge we have now, and you brought your dog into me and you want improvement and you want to see results, man, prednisone probably is going to be on my list. But now, for that itchy dog that I used to prescribe prednisone for, we have these other great meds that just have the itch effect, and they have much less risks of the side effects that prednisone has. And that old school vet that's still prescribing the prednisone, yeah, it's cheap, yeah, it solves the problem, but, you know, we're risking a whole lot of side effects that a lot of owners are not going to tolerate anymore after they find out they could have used something safer with less risk of side effects and still got the job done. So,
what are some of the side effects from prednisone? Because this is one of those podcasts where people are going to listen to it and think, they're going to go to their vet, and all of a sudden the vet's going to say, we're going to put it on prednisone. It's like, well, I heard on the Houndsman XP that it had side effects.
Yeah. That's a good overarching statement here is listen to your local vet, because they are looking at your dog. They are hearing your history. They are hearing and knowing that dog's health history and what's been done and not done in the past, and they know you best. So, you rarely, it's okay to question. I don't mind when people come in with me with questions, but they've usually got a darn good reason for the reason they're prescribing one thing or another. But prednisone, all right, we shouldn't be scared of prednisone or a steroid getting prescribed, but they do have some serious side effect risks. And kudos to Shorty talking about his dogs that he's personally had, those side effects with dexamethasone, because you can get in trouble really fast. And I rarely use steroids. I use them when I have to. But the reason is side effects can be as mild as just seeing things like increased panting, increased peeing and drinking is one of the more common things we see, but it can go all the way up to causing GI ulcers in the stomach or the intestine bad enough that they perforate and they then have a septic abdomen, killing the kidneys. So they affect how the kidneys get blood flow to them, and you can cause really bad kidney side effects that can be irreversible. So those are some of the big things. And then immune suppression. When we're given a steroid, it is down-regulating the immune system to the point where it's no longer responding appropriately. Sometimes we want that. We're going for that. Like in cancer, like we'll prescribe it for dogs for lymphoma if they're not going to go get chemotherapy. We'll use prednisone to kind of help down-regulate that immune system for a little while. But those side effects are big. And you can absolutely kill a dog with steroids, no doubt about it. So you have to use it when you have to, not just because you want to avoid a problem later, just like antibiotics.
We mentioned it in the podcast. It's like, my dog got bit by a snake. What do you think? Shoot it with some Dex. Shoot it with some Dex. Shoot it with some Dex.
Yep. Yep. And you may have seen, I made a post about this on social media. Yeah. There's actually no good evidence that steroids do anything in the snake bite situation, because snake bites, the problem is the toxins in the venom are causing effects on the blood vessels, and they're causing effects on clotting and things like that a steroid is not treating. And like antihistamines, Benadryl, snake bites are not causing. An antihistamine is called so because it's fighting histamine release, which is used in an allergic reaction in your body. And so insect bites and stings, yes, there is histamine release. Snake bites, no, because it's the venom, again, that's doing it. So that's why Benadryl really doesn't have any effect on it. Antibiotics are rarely indicated because they rarely get infected. There's a study to prove that. So, that knowledge comes from, looking at studies, trying to keep up with the latest research. Penicillin, Dex, and Benadryl is the three most common things that I see, guys on Facebook or on the forums say you should give your dog for a snake bite. And I would use exactly none of those unless I actually saw that a bite truly was infected, which again is rare. Pretty much other than that, I wouldn't use those things. Yeah. So that's a perfect example, snake bite treatment, of old school way of thinking, because we used to think that the swelling was the problem, and that's why we gave Dex. It's not the swelling, it's the problem, it's the venom and its effects. We used to think that infection was the problem, and it's not. It's actually the tissue dying and necrosing, we call it. Right. And so we go in there and clean that dead tissue out if we can. And then if it actually gets infected, then we use an antibiotic. So, that's a new school of thought, but it's, slowly changing, and that info's got to get out there. Sometimes those old school ways of thought are just not up to date, and that's a great example of one that's not. Yeah. What we missed, Doc? You took notes? You asked me to. I feel underprepared. You asked me to. Okay, the last thing I guess that I was thinking about is this going to be a good thing or a bad thing? We might want to shut it off now. No, go for it. Cut me off before he says something I disagree with. I guess just the ethics of home treatment and doing stuff at home versus relying on your vet. there's no question you guys have plenty of podcasts covering the topic of hound hunting being under scrutiny and hunting with dogs. And so I think that part of that public perception that I don't see it started to yet, but I am afraid of, is people using things like all of these home treatments thrown out there as an example of, well, here's all these guys that have dogs and they're not taking care of them properly. They're just trying to do stuff at home and risking their dog's health and welfare. And sometimes that is a fair assessment. Now, we've talked about all these things. Most of that is well-intentioned by people doing it. They're not trying to hurt their dog. They're trying to help their dog. They think they're doing the right thing. But I do worry that the public perception of these home remedies and home treatments and avoiding a vet until you have to is going to further play into the view on hounds and hound hunting. And so I guess I would just caution how we talk about this stuff and how we throw this stuff out there in the public eye. Whether that's on social media or YouTube videos or what have you.
Or a podcast.
You said it. Yeah. So, yes, I think we really need to be careful, and we need to strive for, part of my point in creating this Tree Dog Doc social media pages and things like that was to hopefully help pull the hound community to a higher standard of healthcare and caring for their dogs than I think has been the norm. And part of that reason is because I love it and I want to keep doing it. I want the freedom to be able to take my dog hunting and to do those things for the rest of my life. It's already in danger. Let's not give them additional ammo by posting about the cases of the dogs where we treated at home and it didn't work and they died, which rarely gets thrown out on there.
Right.
But I think it's an easy target if people start to realize that kind of stuff is getting done. So let's hold ourselves and each other to a higher standard. And I've seen a switch in mindset of people encouraging, take your dog to the vet. Go get that looked at. Don't ask it on the Facebook group.
Right.
Go get it looked at by somebody who knows what they're doing. Let's keep doing that.
Would you go as far as saying it's irresponsible?
Yes, in some cases I would. Yep, absolutely.
I'm glad you said that.
Yep.
Yep. Well, I said this before. We were talking about dog food. If you're feeding the cheapest stuff because you've got too many hounds or because you got 20 dogs and you can't give them the best feed, you got to at some point we got to step back and take a look and say, is the feed too expensive or have I got too many hounds? In the same way with veterinary medicine, if I'm trying to save money, then there's some things, and I'm not gonna bring my dog in for a split ear to your vet clinic. I'm never gonna do that. I'm gonna fix that at my house, and most of our houndsmen will. But if it's something that is, if I look at my dog and all of a sudden he's lost weight and I know he's parasite free, I may run a stool sample in and that comes back parasite free, then he's still losing weight. We're coming. We're coming to the vet and we're going to figure out what's going on. So I think we have to use some common sense and be responsible for our hounds. And if we've got so many that we can't afford vet care, we need to start looking at if we were holding on to too many hounds. I think that's the most, and I'm glad you said that because we talk about it in training, we talk about it in hunter ethics, we talk about it in wildlife management, and I think this is an important thing. We need to look at it from the veterinary field too. One thing that bothers me though is the view of dogs has changed so much in just the last 20 years. The way people view dogs. 20 years ago, if you saw a dog with a sweater on, it was a freak, and you knew the person leading it was a freak, and you didn't even think about it. But now it's like everywhere you go, somebody's got their fur baby in whatever business they're in because they take their dogs with them. The attitude of Americans, it shows that we've got first world problems, I'm telling you.
We have so much money that we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, so we're going to spend it on our dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have clients that take their dogs to do specialty care and things that I personally would not put my dog through. But that's because exactly like you said, our mindset has changed to where animals are elevated to the level of a person, and what does that do? It also downgrades how valuable people are.
Exactly.
Because now we've put them on the same playing field, and as we've talked about, being a Christian and believing in Jesus, we are made differently. We are separate from animals. They are not on our level of importance and equal to us. And so, it's a scary thought, just how people think of some of these things. But some of those have had some benefits in that the fact of helping to elevate how we look at them. They are a creature made by God. They feel pain. They do suffer. They have things that maybe we overlooked in the past or pushed off to the side. But as a whole, yes, I would say that it's a dangerous mindset. Yeah. And that it is negatively affecting, how animals are viewed and how we look at them. And those of us who are more practically minded, I work on farm animals. It's usually an economic decision, not an emotional one. It's not just affecting us as houndsmen. It's affecting the cattle farmer, and it's affecting the chicken farmer and those things, and their ability to produce clean, healthy food for us. So there's multiple dangers in different areas of society with pulling those animals up on a pedestal that they don't belong on. So.
Yep. Anthropomorphization of animals.
Yep.
Crazy. Doc, I appreciate your time. If you haven't got anything else.
I think that's all I had.
Man, I appreciate you doing this. I really do.
Yeah, glad to do it.
And I like it when we bring out the best information, accurate information. We're all experts. What was the name of that study again?
It's the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Dunning-Kruger. I got to remember that. I'm going to make a note of that Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yep. That's the one.
I suffer from that sometimes.
Everybody does. Everybody does.
Well, Doc, until next time, man, you follow your hounds and I'll follow mine.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
You bet.